and then take samples of the sand.
Right.
Somebody can analyze it, figure out are these tracks going to work. And this is why they started having to do that.
I think part of the issue here too is when you actually walk on the sand of these beaches, what you become aware of is that there's sort of a top layer of this stuff. There's almost a crust that's on the beach that gets hardened and sun-baked and turns kind of black. And yet, once your foot goes down into it, the underneath part, again, is really flowery and non-cohesive. I will say, as the only person on this podcast that has actually physically walked from the airfield and back, because some of us got taken up on buses,
Indeed.
Elitists. And here we are cackling. My wife refers to us as the click and clack of naval history.
Yeah, card talk. I think exactly the same way.
That's right.
Anyway, and somebody who asked that cackle laugh. Was that you? Are you Yeah, and educators who are watching podcasts are going to say, what the heck are you talking about? There was a radio show, folks. We're back in the days of radio. Right? I used to love that show.
That's right. Anyway, the point I was going to make is typically what happens with our guests is they walk down to Suribachi, they go up to the top of that puppy, and then they come back down. And the next thing they all want to do, of course, is go down to the beaches and get some of this black volcanic ash, because it's iconic. If you go down there after you've been yomping on these dirt roads to get up to Suribachi, and as soon as you hit the beach, you're like, holy what? You're just getting between trying to go through this stuff. And that mile walk along the beach until you get to the path that goes back up to the main road and up to the commemoration site, that is the longest mile walk you can do on this island. And it's absolutely exhausting. And so you think about these young Marines coming ashore on this thing with an 85 to 100-pound worth of pack on their back, trying to get up that goddamn sand. It's bad stuff.
It's walk on the beach, if you walk on the dry sand, it's a lot of work. So you get into the wet sand.
Right.
To get for these guys, once they get off the wet sand, they need to get up that dry sand. And it's
and it's an incline too. Yeah.
And that's what I was going to say. Is the Marine said it was like walking in coffee ground, which I think is an accurate description. I really do. And there were guys who said it would be 3 steps forward and 2 steps back. So, you couldn't get anywhere with any kind of rapidity. You couldn't move. And I put it in notes for guys who were trained to move fast wherever they went. They couldn't, physically could not. Obviously they get ashore. But, it's the physical exertion. And if you look at the footage, which I got miles of it, I'll show it, these dudes are smoked, man. Just before they even get ashore, inland, rather, before they get inland. You can see these guys puffing and puffing. These are prime condition 19-year-old United States. Right. These dudes are sucking wind. And the thing is, as you mentioned it briefly, in passing, but it's terraced. The beaches are literally, they're terraced. And that first terrace is steep. It's a haul to get up there from their original landing beaches, which are obviously now a little bit further inland, to the first or second, even the second terrace. It is stout. It is a stout run. Serious.
Yeah.
So, one blessing, if there was a blessing here initially, is that the incoming Japanese fire was very, very minimal as the Marines are landing offshore. We all know what's coming. But opposition on the beach was described as light, and what little had been encountered had been virtually eliminated at this point. As the first wave made it ashore, the second and third wave followed those behind. So you heard foreign guys on the beach real quick. The initial waves were consolidated and pressed inland to a point roughly 300 yards from the shore. So they're making pretty good progress, albeit slow, in the coffee grounds that they're running through. The only loud noises on the beaches were the cusses and the hollers of the Marines as they move further inland. However, the popular myth that the Marines didn't take any fire when landing Bill, is not accurate, is it?
It is not. So on the extreme right flank of the beach is the blue beach too. I'll bring that back up. We're talking about over here, 325, we ran into a buzzsaw, a Japanese fire, at the moment they set foot on Iwo Jima black sands in an area the Marines called the Rock Quarry, and I'll show that here too.
Right there.
Right here. Yeah. Heavy enemy machine gun fire raped Marines as they hit the beach. The terrain in that area is craggy, almost solid rock, hence the name Rock Quarry, and was impervious, good big word, to anything but direct fire. As the Marines moved up the first terrace, they ran into a crossfire from sand-covered pillboxes and the quarry. These are probably naval infantry, right? Because it's on the island, not in the island. Yeah. Lieutenant Colonel Justice Chambers, a Saipan veteran, said, "You could have held up a cigarette and lit it from all this stuff flying by. We were in for a hell of a time." At that moment, the 25th was the only unit taking any kind of heavy fire, but that wasn't going to last a second.
Indeed, it did not. One of the most important aspects of Furabayashi's defensive plan was to allow the Marines to accumulate on the beach before he unleashes the dogs. About six, I've seen various.
Yeah, the accounts are all over the place.
They are. They really are. And I think it's mainly, I think it's just where the artillery fire after the land.
Yeah.
Some guys say 45 minutes after the landing. Some guys say 60. Some guys say 90 minutes after the landing. Well, regardless of the time, Furabayashi gives the order, and these guys just unleash it. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, and one of the sort of false impressions that we get as modern consumers of history, if you watch a movie like, Letters from Iwo Jima, because of the nature of the movie as a visual storytelling medium, of course they have to compress that time down to just a couple of minutes with tension building, while the Marines are coming ashore. But it was a significantly longer time because Furabayashi, being nobody's fool, understands that he wants to get several successive waves of Americans onto that beach, and he understands that that can't happen, instantaneously. And so, yeah, you get all sorts of different measurements of roughly an hour, I think, would be ish, 45 minutes, maybe something like that. But there are now several, successive waves of Americans who have been deposited on these beaches, and now that there is a good concentration where your indirect fire weapons can actually make some hay here. Now it gets us there.
There's about 8 battalions working in ish. The mortar and artillery fire that the Japanese are dropping in here are it is incredibly accurate because, no surprise here, everything is pre-registered. Every freaking inch of those beaches is pre-registered and just zeroed in by this indirect fire artillery and marine.
They've all got their little cards and like, if I can put on this sector, it's this deflection of this elevation. Right.
Yeah. And they're raining it down. I mean, they're bringing it down. These Marines instinctively go to the ground. That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to dig in, and we already know it doesn't take at all. There's nowhere to hide. This place is as flat as a freaking pancake. No trees, no rocks, no nothing to cover. They are literally in the kill zone.
That is one of the most incredible sights I think that I've ever beheld. When you stand on the top of Suribachi and you look down from the top of that hill to the landing beaches, I mean, my God, there's not so much as a blade of grass to hide behind. It's just absolutely naked to your gunfire. And so, you think about the Marines bunkering under the guns of that mother for 4 days, before they finally get to taking it. It's unearthly.
The one thing, Mike Murdoch, we talked about before, the one thing he said was that, he was complaining about the sand and, not being able to dig in and everything else. in a lot more colorful language than I remember on this show. But he said the one advantage to that, and there was an advantage to it, is that the ground was so soft that when the artillery would hit, it would often, not always obviously, but often would absorb a lot of the concussion.
Right.
So there were guys that obviously if you're close to it, you're going to get it regardless. But there were guys who maybe if this was cycling, they would have gotten it, and they didn't get it because the ground sucked up all of the concussion.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that, but yeah, that would make sense.
So over 6,000 Marines are on the beach at this point. They're obviously stunned by the initial onslaught. They slowly begin to move inland because there's nowhere else to go. There's nowhere to hide. You got to get inland. Go. The few LBTAs, and you will remember the LBTA is an LBT. It's a tank. It's an amphibious tank. Not a Sherman, but an LBTA. They were absolutely blasted by Japanese gunfire. The few that had made it inland a little ways were just annihilated. They were just blown to smithereens by the Japanese.
And there's a fair amount of direct fire going on here too. Yeah, I mean the Japanese have lots of 37 and particularly 47 millimeter anti-tank guns on this island, particularly in Suribachi, because that gives you a really good field of fire. And so, you know, a 47 millimeter can really reach down and touch something like an LBTA and just, perforate it. So a lot of these things are being blown up. The other thing I wanted to point out is that the majority of Kurabayashi's heavy guns are further north on the island. They're all up on the Motoyama Plateau. So, you know, they have the ability and will continue to have the ability throughout the campaign to rain this fire down on the more exposed portions of the southern part of the island. And yeah, all that stuff is pre-registered. They've got a number of these really big, I think they're 320 millimeter spigot mortars as well. And then, one of the Marine accounts, you know, says it's like this huge flying trash can, you know, you're coming over it, and it's not a very accurate weapon, but you can really hear it, you know, and it kind of wobbles on down. It's got big warhead, so those things are very unpleasant as well. Yeah, it's a nightmare here.
It's a shooting gallery. It is exactly what it's a shooting gallery. So the beach itself quickly became a quagmire of destroyed LBTs, LCVPs, Jeeps, and obviously the mangled bodies of these young Marines. Radio reports from the Marines told the story of the early moments, and these are direct quotes from the 23rd Marines, quote, taking heavy casualties and can't move, mortars killing us. 27th Marines, all units pinned down by artillery and mortars, casualties heavy, need tank support fast. 28th Marines, nearly across the neck, taking heavy fire and movement stopped. Machine gun and artillery fire, heaviest I've ever seen, unquote. And these are combat veterans that are relaying this information. One of the best quotes in the whole show right here. Major John Antonelli put it best. He said, quote, crap hit the fan in copious quantities.
Exactly. Yeah.
Unquote. The Japanese fire was murderous, absolutely murderous. Even Carroll veterans, who had been through that hell, declared that Iwo was the worst they had ever seen, bar none, not even close. The beachhead, such as it was turning into a chaotic, absolute mess. Artillery was devastating anything and everything all over the place. The wounded were laid out on the beach waiting evacuation, and artillery barrages were wiping these guys out as they're laying there, just prostrate.
Just put it to the back too.
Oh yeah, it's hellacious. It is absolutely hellacious. We talked about the LBTAs. Bill, they're sending Shermans in here too, though.
Yeah, they are. You know, the problem, they were requested by the 27th Marines. They made it ashore only to get eviscerated by Japanese fire. Sergeant Thomas Gallant recalled watching the Sherman get hit. A round punch into it as a finger through pipe. It made a hole all the way through at the thickest part. The crew was dead and piled in a jelly liquefied mass, blended into a viscous, sticky fluid. Boy, it gets graphic. Like something from a nightmare. This had to be one of those anti-tank guns, right?
Yeah, it's got to be a 47. At close range, that gun is perfectly capable of perforating a Sherman. You know, the Shermans that are knocked out in the lagoon on Saipan, those are all victims of 47s. We're going to see a lot more of this kind of stuff on Okinawa as well. At reasonably short ranges up to 500 or 600 meters, yeah, that 47 command was absolutely due in a Sherman.
Yeah. Well, the chaos on shore prompted Kelly Turner, commanding the battleships, to close the landing beaches, the first and only time that had occurred, or would occur, during the war. So cluttered with wreckage with beaches that nothing, literally nothing, could get in or out. The log jams ashore had to be cleared before more men and material could come ashore. For nearly 2 hours, the beaches remained closed as the Japanese fired to continue to rain down. Kelly Turner, of course, commanding the amphibious troops, not the battleships, but the point is he's trying to get closer to shorten the transit distance in and out of the beach itself.
Kelly Turner actually has to close the beach, I think, 3 times on D-Day because of the just absolute. Yeah, and that's what it is. And again, the footage, you'll see it, I mean, you can hardly move for all the junk that's on the beach, and I say junk because it's all like wrecked digging boats, LVTs, Jeeps, all kinds of, I mean, it looks like a junkyard. It really does. Nothing can get in, nothing can get out.
This is the point where we were talking about earlier, where the beach master's job got really hard.
Yeah.
Conflagration.
All right, so finally at 14:58, the situation clears somewhat, allowing the 5th Marine Division's 26 Marines to land. Still, these guys were fresh as they were, waded into a morass of wreckage and twisted bodies. Heavy fire continued to pour in on the beaches 4 hours after H hour, and these guys are absolutely cut to ribbons. Bill, tell us about the 5th Division's 27th Marines and their task here.
So they were assigned the task of cutting the head off the snake that was Suribachi. So again, right down here, they're supposed to go like this, right across the island. And so specifically, 227, 2nd Battalion 227 was to cut across the narrow neck of the island. One of those Marines was your old buddy, Jim Goodrich. So Jim had been at Guadalcanal with Lima Company 3-6 and had been at Tarawa as well. Now, one of the 5th battle-hardened cadre, here he was on Iwo Jima, a machine gun squad leader being tasked with running across the island and closing off the volcano from the rest of Kobayashi's defensive network. And here's a quote from him. "Crawling on my belly, it sure seemed like a long way across," he said. "We caught a lot of casualties going through there. We caught a lot of fire. In my squad, we had already lost 3 men out of 12, right? 3 out of 12. So he's 25% down, and they haven't gone across yet. Long way or not, Goodrich was among the first to bring his Marines across that neck. Some of the only Marines to accomplish their D-Day mission. That's pretty incredible, Sam.
It is, it really is. Yeah. I remember he was with me on Eagle. That's actually where I met him and his grandson, Kevin Sullivan, who's probably listening to this. Hey, Kevin, if you want. But I remember we were standing on the top of Suribachi looking down. And he
Where the boss that brought you, right?
Yes, yes. Indeed. He's looking down, and he says, "It doesn't look that far down." Damn, it's a long way to go there. And that's key, is that these are literally among the only guys to accomplish a D-Day mission, such as the fire that is being put on these people. And it's not to
And
say
that was
that
squad. Did the whole company make it, or just
they did.
squad?
They did. No, they got their people across there, and they wound up cutting it off right then and there. But they're just a small pits. I'm not saying that they were any better than anybody else. I'm just saying that they were one of the only ones to accomplish their mission on D-Day. Such was the defensive fire of the Japanese. So, I mean, that will tell you something. You got 2 full Marine divisions landing here, and there's only a handful of units that accomplish the mission in a day. That's how serious this situation is. John, you wanted to talk about the dominant terrain that is Suribachi.
Yeah, well, and you know, we kind of already touched on this, that it really does completely command all of these beaches, that any sort of a direct fire weapon on this hill, and a lot of the weapons in Suribachi, again, it's not on Suribachi, it's in Suribachi, really are direct fire weapons. They got a lot of machine guns, they got anti-tank guns as well. A little bit lower down, there's some artillery pieces as well that are taking pod shots. And some of these emplacements, again, have steel doors. Again, they open up the steel door, they yoink this, push the artillery piece up, take a pot shot, bring it back into the cave, close the doors again. So it's really difficult to knock these places out. And again, you and I both have sort of seen what it's like to be on top of this hill, and it really does dominate the entire island at this point.
You can see literally everything.
Yeah.
With the exception
The
of
highest
the far end.
the far north again. Like, yeah, every place there is a Marine right now on D-Day, man. You can see that. There's a famous.
Good.
I was just going to say, there's a famous photograph of a Marine 75mm back howitzer that is taking pot shots at Suribachi, and that really does give you a sense for. I mean, when you're walking up to this hill, it's like an ogre, you know, just clunkers over the, you know, this end of the island. And that shot of that Marine 75 shows you just how naked you as a Marine were. The only thing you've got to hide behind is the gun shield on this gun. Because, man, there ain't nothing else to hide behind it. It's
yeah. I mean, there's nothing there. And when you're on, to your point exactly, when you're on top of Suribachi and you're looking down, you can see every single movement they take. Every. If some guy scratches his face, you can see it. I mean, it's incredible. It really is. It's absolutely incredible. So, shortly after noon, elements of the 23rd Marines had captured a large portion of Modi Island 1. The rest of the 4th Division's progress, however, had been slow, running into a series of minefields. That's another thing we didn't even talk about, is that the Japanese had mines everywhere. We talk about the Germans and the minefields and you know, Normandy and all that, the Atlantic Wall. I mean, they had them everywhere on Iwo Jima. They were literally everywhere. They ran into a series of these minefields, and I mean series, and concrete blockhouses so camouflaged that the Marines didn't see them until they opened fire on them. That was obviously a problem. Bunkers, caves, pillboxes, all lined the quarry on the quarry section. Still giving the 4th Marine Division hell all evening long. From the high ground of the quarry, the Japanese fire still poured over the beaches that night.
One of the scenes from Letters from Iwo Jima that I do think is really effective, again, even with the compressed time frame before they start putting fire on the beaches, there's this one scene where you're inside a Japanese bunker and they slowly, you know, they ratchet up the little firing slit, you know, thing that's hiding the firing slit. And you, as the Japanese machine gunner, are looking out through the sort of the camouflage netting, and all you can see is the ankles of the Marines that are advancing on you. And that's why a lot of these Marines in many cases couldn't see these defensive fortifications that were really well camouflaged and really down low in the ground. And yeah, when they open up on you, they just murder the front rank of these guys, and you don't know where the fire is coming from, because in a lot of cases, yeah, it's coming down from like the level of your ankles at you. It's bad. It's a horrible it's a bad place.
Casualties, no surprise to your point exactly, had been absolutely horrendous. 325 suffered an 83% casualty rate on D-Day alone. Of the 900 Marines from 325 that landed, only 150 were combat effective by nightfall the first day. That should one unit do. That should,
yeah. Don't even know what to say about that. Right.
In most leading from the front, they are wiped out. And far too common sights on Iwo Jima. PFCs and corporals are leading companies in some states, in some 2,312 Marines and Navy corpsmen were killed in the first 18 hours.
And I just want to stop right there, because I had not seen that statistic before. I don't know where you dredged that up, but these are not casualties, these are KIA, is what you're saying.
Correct.
The total butcher's bill for this battle, fast forward, is going to be 6,921 Americans going to be KIA as a result of this thing, KIA, MIA. So that means that the first third of that butcher's bill is experienced in the first 18 hours of this campaign. That blew me away. I had no idea that the casualty rate on D-Day was as bad as it was. But that gives you a real sense for just how devastating the initial fires that Kirby Ashi fired, brings down on these landways is. Holy Moses.
Yeah, I mean, it was an absolute bloodbath. There's some radio snippets, like radio broadcasts that were broadcast from the beach. I'm sure we probably all heard them. I'm going to see if I can take some more quote in here. When the radio commentators, for lack of a better term, are talking, and they're talking on the beach or near the beach, you can hear in the background, you can hear the crack. I mean, it sounds like hail hitting a metal roof. Gunfire, and then God knows who cares. But I mean, it's just the amount of noise behind these guys is, we're trying to broadcast to up to the minute before, if you will. It's unreal. And that's just a small little window of time, right there. It's unreal. It's on fire. So, Bill, there is a unit specifically. Easy Company, 2nd Battalion, 28th Marines. We got to talk about these guys because they play a huge role in what we're going to finish talking about this day. Tell us about these guys and the 28th Marines specifically.
Well, so these are the guys who were tasked with conquering the heights of Mount Suribachi, a daunting task to be sure. The dormant volcano was honeycombed with caves and hidden gun positions. Pre-landing and post-landing naval gunfire and marine artillery had been hammering Suribachi, so all these divots that now become obstacles as they're trying to get up the mountain. And as you might know, Seth, if you had walked up the mountains to think about it, getting up there not under fire is difficult. Getting up there under fire is darn near impossible. So it's up to Lieutenant Colonel Harry Liversedge's Marines to capture what they call hot rocks. Before the Marines laid 70 camouflage bunkers at the volcano's base, and these positions would have to be knocked out one by one before the looming mass would ever be assaulted. That started on D+1. Torrents and marine artillery naval gunfire fell on the base of Suribachi as Liversedge mounted his first assault against the estimated 2,000 Japanese inside the volcano. 2,000 inside the volcano. So it's 0830, Seth. It begins.
And Colonel Chandler Johnson is the name you're going to hear for the rest of this episode. His men are the guys that are at the tip of the spear. Almost as soon as these guys take off, they come under withering fire. Withering fire. Johnson, who's
Choose to follow your instincts. Every Mazda is designed to feel like it was made just for you.
one book, I forget which one it's in my bag back here, described him as pudgy, almost fat.
So, I'm seeing a lot of those.
No, you don't. But this guy had a Seneca on his own. He, in the middle of all this fire, as a lot of, we talked about it before, these fiery leaders, no pun intended, are. He gets up, walks in plain view of the Japanese in the middle of all this fire, and he yells, quote, "It's a hell of a day and a hell of a place to fight this goddamn war, let's go," unquote. Just getting his people moving. And he was one of these guys, who Chandler Johnson, again, all good leaders are, absolutely loved by his men. They had no taxes, none. They paid a heavy price in going through there. By mid-morning, the Marines had advanced a scant 70 yards. They started off at 8:30, so this is about, no, say 10:30, so 2 hours-ish, 70 yards. Shortly after noon, the Shermans finally arrived and began taking out the Japanese emplacements one by one. Particularly effective were the flame-throwing Shermans that the Marines named the Ronson Lighters, or Zippos for obvious reasons. There's footage of these things too, and we actually have them here in our museum. It's these Shermans can spit out flame at like 60 yards or
Yeah, I was
something.
gonna say, yeah, 50 to 60 yards is pretty common. And what makes that so attractive is your average flamethrower operator got this thing on his back. I mean, you know, you don't have nearly the range on that thing. You got to get up real close. But these larger tank-mounted units have got a much longer range, and so yeah, you can just